The scream that tore through Devil's Jaw Canyon wasn't quite human, but the desperation in it was. Jack Callahan's hands froze on his gold pan as the sound ricocheted off red sandstone walls, each echo more haunting than the last. Blood. He could smell it now, metallic and fresh in the desert air. He'd heard screams before. 4 years of war had taught him the difference between pain and terror, between the wounded and the dying. This was different. This was someone fighting death itself, refusing to surrender even when hope had fled. The Wyoming sun hammered down like a forge, turning the canyon into an oven. Jack wiped sweat from his eyes, leaving streaks of mud across skin weathered by 38 years of hard living. A crimson splash on the canyon wall 20 feet above caught his attention, fresh blood still wet despite the merciless heat. Another cry drifted down, weaker now, but no less desperate. Jack's jaw clenched. He'd come to this forsaken stretch of badlands to avoid other people's problems. For 3 years, Devil's Jaw Canyon had been his sanctuary, but that voice was young female and fading fast. Damn it. He dropped the pan, its clatters seeming to mock the canyon's usual silence. Every instinct screamed at him to ignore the sound, to return to his methodical separation of gold from sand. But the blood on the rocks told a story he couldn't ignore. Jack checked his Colt .45 and began climbing toward the source of the sound, following a trail of crimson droplets that led up the treacherous canyon wall like breadcrumbs in a fairy tale gone wrong. The climb was perilous, even for someone who knew every handhold. Red sandstone crumbled under pressure, and the heat made the rock too hot to touch comfortably. But Jack had made this ascent dozens of times, usually to check for unwanted visitors or survey the endless expanse of badlands beyond his refuge. 20 feet up, he found where the blood trail began a scrape on the rock where someone had lost their footing, leaving behind skin and crimson evidence of their desperation. Jack Iron Callahan had been many things in his life. Cavalry scout, deputy sheriff, bounty hunter, husband, father. Now he was just a man who dug gold from creek beds and tried not to think about why he preferred rattlesnakes to his own kind. The war had started his education in human cruelty, but it was what came after the badge, the law, the slow realization that justice was a luxury the powerful could ignore, that had really opened his eyes. Then Sarah and little Anna had taught him that love was possible even in a world gone mad, right up until the Comanche raid that proved him wrong about everything. 50 feet up the canyon wall formed a natural shelf. Jack had discovered it during his first week here, noted it as a good vantage point. Now, as he hauled himself over the lip of stone, he found it occupied. She was wedged into a crack between 2 rocks, like a wounded animal seeking shelter. 19, maybe 20, with long black hair matted with blood and dust. Cheyenne, everything about her told him that. Her dark eyes opened as his shadow fell across her, and the terror in them hit him like a fist to the gut. She tried to scramble deeper into the crevice, but her left leg wouldn't support her. Blood seeped through her dress where a bullet had grazed her upper arm, and rope burns encircled her wrists like bracelets of pain. "Easy," Jack said, raising his hands. "I won't hurt you." She stared at him with the wariness of prey that had learned hunters came in all forms. Her lips moved, but no sound emerged, her throat too raw from screaming, too dry from desert heat. Jack unscrewed his canteen and took a small sip before offering it. "Clean water, cold." Her resolve cracked. She reached for the canteen with shaking hands, and Jack saw more rope burns around her wrists, still fresh and angry. "What's your name?" he asked as she drank. She lowered the canteen, meeting his gaze with surprising directness. "Lila. Lila Whitefeather. Jack Callahan." He nodded toward her wounded arm. "Someone shot you." Her expression hardened fear, transforming into something colder and more dangerous. "Colonel Vance. He murdered my people. All of them." Jack felt ice form in his stomach. He'd heard whispers everyone had about cavalry units that operated beyond oversight. But hearing it from someone who'd lived through it was different. How many? 43. The number fell like a stone into still water. Men, women, children, elders. They came at dawn with papers said we had to move for the railroad. When my grandfather asked to read the documents properly, she shuddered. They started shooting. Everyone who moved, everyone who ran, everyone who breathed. The late afternoon sun was sinking toward the western rim, painting the rocks in shades of blood and fire. Soon darkness would come, and with it, the desert's killing cold. "Can you walk?" Jack asked. She tried to stand, gasping as her injured ankle took her weight. Jack caught her as she stumbled, feeling her tense as if to pull away. Then exhaustion won out. "My camp's below. Food, medical supplies, shelter." "Why?" The question was sharp with suspicion. "Why help me?" Jack was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the endless expanse of canyon country. Somewhere out there, Colonel Vance was probably filing reports about his successful operation. Somewhere out there, other men were counting profits from land bought with blood. "Because I've seen what happens when good people do nothing," he said finally. As he helped Lila down the treacherous canyon wall, neither of them noticed the dust plume rising in the distance, a cavalry patrol moving fast across the desert floor, following a trail that led straight to Devil's Jaw Canyon. Jack's camp occupied a natural alcove in the canyon wall, sheltered from wind and rain, but open enough to catch morning sun. 3 years of solitary living had taught him efficiency, a lean-to for shelter, a fire ring for cooking supply caches that would last through hard winters. He helped Lila settle on a bedroll near the fire, then set about cleaning her wounds by flickering flame light. The bullet had only grazed her arm, but the wound was dirty and would fester if left untreated. "This will hurt," he warned, pouring whiskey over clean cloth. Lila gritted her teeth but didn't cry out as he worked. Her self-control was impressive. Most men would have been cursing by now. "Sprained, not broken," he concluded after examining her ankle. "You'll be walking in a few days." "I don't have a few days." Her voice carried urgent desperation. "Vance knows I escaped. He'll send patrols." Jack poured coffee from the pot that perpetually simmered at his fire's edge. "Tell me about this Colonel Vance." Lila accepted the coffee, gratefully wrapping her hands around the warm tin. "He came to our camp 3 days ago with soldiers and a man in an expensive suit, railroad surveyor, I think. Said the government was claiming our land under some new law. What happened when your people refused? My grandfather didn't refuse. He just asked to see the papers properly to have time to consider." Lila's voice went flat, emotionless. "Vance shot him, right there in front of everyone. Said he was resisting lawful authority. Then his men opened fire." Jack felt familiar anger, building the same cold fury that had driven him through war and a decade of hunting bad men. "You're certain about the numbers?" "I counted the bodies." Her voice broke slightly. "After they left, I went back. Women shot while shielding children. Children shot while running to their mothers. My grandfather, my parents, my fiancé. All dead because they wanted time to read papers before abandoning their home." The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Jack had heard similar stories, but most people didn't want to listen. It was easier to believe progress was clean. "There's more," Lila continued. "Before the shooting started, I heard Vance talking to the railroad man. They weren't just taking our land, they were planning to make it look like we attacked first." Jack's blood chilled. False flag. Frame it as self-defense claim we were part of a larger uprising. Use the massacre to justify seizing more tribal lands across the territory. Lila's hands tightened around the coffee cup. Start a war that would make them rich. The sound of approaching hoofbeats cut through their conversation like a blade. Jack was on his feet, instantly kicking dirt over the fire to smother the flames. In the sudden darkness, he could hear multiple horses moving fast across the desert floor. "Stay here," he whispered, helping Lila to a hidden alcove behind his lean-to. "Don't make a sound." 7 men rode into his camp, and their faces hard and dust-covered in the torchlight. Jack recognized the leader immediately. Amos Creed, his black beard shot through with gray small eyes glittering with something that might have been madness. Well, well, Creed drawled, dismounting with theatrical slowness. Iron Jack Callahan, hiding in his little rat hole. Creed. Jack's voice was level, unimpressed. Long way from town for a social call. Nothing social about it. We're hunting a dangerous Indian Cheyenne girl, wounded, probably armed. You seen anything like that? Jack studied each man in turn, memorizing faces and weapon positions. 4 cavalry soldiers, including a nervous sergeant with shaking hands. 2 civilians with the look of hired guns. All on edge, all ready for trouble. Haven't seen any Indians, Jack said, dangerous or otherwise. Funny thing, though. Creed's smile was all teeth and malice. We found tracks leading right into this canyon. Fresh tracks, too, size of a woman's foot. One of the soldiers was examining the ground around Jack's camp with his torch. After a few minutes, he called out, "Found something, sir." He held up a small object, a Cheyenne bead probably fallen from Lila's dress. In the torchlight, the blue and white pattern seemed to glow with accusation. Our Cheyenne beadwork, Creed said, rolling the bead between his fingers. Fresh as you please. Still want to claim you haven't seen any Indians? Found that 3 days ago down by the creek. Jack lied smoothly. Figured it washed down from upstream. Upstream. Creed's voice dripped disbelief. 20 miles upstream through country that's been dry for months. Believe what you want, Creed. You always do. The tension ratcheted up another notch. Hands drifted toward weapons, and Jack could feel the situation balanced on a knife's edge. Search the camp, Creed ordered. The soldiers moved efficiently, overturning equipment and probing every shadow. Jack watched them work his hand near his Colt, calculating distances and angles. They were thorough, but not smart, and they missed the hidden alcove where Lila was concealed by inches. Nothing here, sir? The sergeant reported. Just prospecting gear. Creed walked over to stand directly in front of Jack, close enough that Jack could smell whiskey on his breath and see the cruel intelligence in his eyes. You know what I think? I think you're lying. I think that girl is here somewhere, and you're hiding her. I think you've got a dirty mind and too much time on your hands. The slap came fast and hard, rocking Jack's head to the side. But instead of retaliating, Jack smiled, a cold, dangerous expression that made 2 soldiers step backward. And that's free, Jack said quietly. The next one's going to cost you. For a moment, the canyon was silent, except for wind through stone and the crackle of torches. Then Creed laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You always were too smart for your own good, Callahan, but not smart enough. He remounted his horse. We'll be back, and when we find that girl, and things are going to go hard for anyone who helped her. The patrol rode out as quickly as they'd come, their torches disappearing into desert darkness. Jack waited until the hoofbeats faded, before helping Lila out of her hiding place. How long before they return? She asked. Jack was already gathering supplies and weapons. Not long enough. We need to be gone before dawn. Where can we go? You said Fort Bridger is 60 miles through rough country. Jack paused, looking at her thoughtfully. There's another option. Your people know about the Heart of Stone, a place up in the high country where the canyon splits. There's a man there who might help us. Red Owl. Lila breathed. But he's a rogue and outlaw. The Army's been hunting him for years. The Army's been hunting a lot of people for the wrong reasons, Jack replied. 5 years ago, Red Owl saved my life. If anyone can help us get the truth out, it's him. As Jack finished packing and prepared to abandon the only home he'd known for 3 years, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Fresh horse tracks led away from his camp, not toward town with Creed's patrol, but toward the high country. Someone had been watching them. someone who knew exactly where they were going. The hunt was about to become far more dangerous. They left the canyon in the hour before dawn, when desert air was crisp and stars were fading. Jack led his pack horse, while Lila rode his saddle mount, following game trails and dry washes that would make tracking difficult. The route to the Heart of Stone led through some of Wyoming's most treacherous country red rock formations that could hide armies, box canyons that became death traps, in flash floods passages so narrow that single riflemen could hold off cavalry troops. "Tell me about Red Owl," Lila said as they picked their way through a maze of sandstone spires. Jack was quiet for a moment, remembering. "Winter of '74. I was tracking Caleb Morrison, murderer rustler, the kind of snake who'd kill for pocket change. Trail led into the high country during the worst blizzard I'd ever seen. They paused at a ridge to rest the horses and check their back trail. The desert stretched behind them like a brown ocean, empty except for distant dust devils and the dark scar of Devil's Jaw Canyon. Morrison knew the country better than I did," Jack continued. "Led me into a box canyon during a whiteout, then doubled back to finish me. Would have worked too, except Red Owl was tracking the same man." Why was Red Owl after him? Morrison had raided a Cheyenne camp the week before. Killed 2 women, and an old man took their horses and supplies. Red Owl had been following his trail just like I was. Jack's grin was wolfish. They had a disagreement about Morrison's future. Short disagreement. They resumed their journey following switchbacks toward higher country. The temperature dropped as they gained elevation, and Jack was grateful for the heavy coats he'd brought. "What made you become a bounty hunter?" Lila asked. "Started as a deputy sheriff in Colorado. Thought I could make a difference, help build something decent." Jack was quiet for a moment. "But I learned that the law doesn't always serve justice, and justice doesn't always follow the law." "What changed your mind?" "The sheriff I worked for was corrupt. Took money from gambling houses, brothels, mining operations. Didn't matter what they did to customers or workers, as long as his cut kept coming, he looked the other way." The trail leveled onto a broad mesa dotted with juniper and sage. In the distance, Jack could see the 3-fingered canyon system the Cheyenne called the Heart of Stone. The final straw was a man named Dutch Hennessy. Jack continued. "Protection racket extorting money from honest businesses. When the general store owner refused to pay Dutch, burned him out. Man died in the fire with his wife and 2 children. But you had evidence. Witnesses evidenced Dutch dead to rights. Sheriff Garrett buried the case, claimed it was accidental. Dutch was back on the street the next day." Jack's hands tightened on the reins. "That night I turned in my badge. 3 days later, Dutch Hennessy was found dead with a bullet in his brain." They rode in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Jack found himself studying Lila's profile as she gazed out over the endless expanse of canyon country. There was strength in her face, intelligence, but also deep sadness that reminded him of his own reflection. "What about your life before Vance?" he asked. Lila was quiet for so long, Jack thought she wouldn't answer. "I was going to be married," she said finally. "To a warrior named Standing Bear. The ceremony was planned for spring. What happened to him? Killed in the first volley when Vance's men started shooting. Died trying to shield the children." She touched a carved pendant at her throat. "This was his gift, a promise that we'd build a life together." The pendant was white stone carved in the shape of a bird in flight. Even from horseback, Jack could see the intricate detail work that spoke of hours spent creating something beautiful for someone loved. As they approached the entrance to the Heart of Stone, a figure emerged from behind a cluster of boulders, a Cheyenne warrior painted for war, his rifle trained on Jack's chest. Lila called out in her native language, her voice carrying diplomatic formality. The warrior replied suspiciously, but after a tense exchange, he lowered his weapon and gestured for them to follow. "What did you tell him?" Jack asked. "The truth. That we're being hunted by the man who massacred my people and we need Red Owl's help." "What did he say?" Lila's smile was grim. "He said Red Owl has been expecting us." But as they followed the warrior deeper into the twisting passages of the Heart of Stone, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far more complicated than they'd bargained for. The Heart of Stone was a natural fortress, carved by wind and water over millions of years. Instead of a single canyon, it was a maze of interconnected passages and hidden valleys, accessible only through routes that could be defended by a handful of warriors. Red Owl's camp occupied a circular valley deep within the maze, surrounded by towering walls of gray stone. A dozen hide lodges were arranged around a central fire pit, with horses grazing in a natural corral, and warriors standing guard at strategic points. Red Owl himself had aged in the 5 years since Jack had seen him. Gray streaked his black hair, and deep lines were carved around his dark eyes. But when he gripped Jack's forearm in greeting, his strength was still formidable. "Iron Jack," he said in careful English. "You bring storms to my door." "Storms seem to follow me around," Jack replied. "Like a bad reputation." Red Owl's smile was brief but genuine. "Come, we eat, we talk. The girl needs rest." They gathered around the central fire as the sun reached its zenith, the stone walls providing blessed shade. Red Owl's warriors formed a loose circle, their faces grave, as Lila told her story in her native language. When she finished, Red Owl was quiet for a long time, staring into the flames. "This Colonel Vance," he said finally. "He is not the first to wear blue coat and speak lies." "Maybe not," Jack agreed, "but he's the one we can stop." "Stop?" Red Owl's voice carried bitter amusement. "You think white man's courts care about Indian blood? You think papers will bring back the dead?" One of the younger warriors spoke up angrily. Red Owl listened, then turned back to Jack. "Swift Eagle says we should kill you both. Says white man brings nothing but death to our people." Jack felt tension in the circle, saw hands drift toward weapons. But Red Owl held up a hand. "Swift Eagle speaks from pain. His family died at Sand Creek. But pain makes poor counsel." He looked directly at Jack. "What do you want from us?" Jack chose his words carefully. "Vance has patrols covering every route to Fort Bridger. He owns Ghost Creek, probably half the territorial government. But he doesn't know about this place. Help us reach someone who can't be bought. And then we make sure the whole territory knows what happened to Lila's people." Red Owl translated for the others, and a heated discussion broke out among the warriors. Jack caught fragments arguments about trust, about seeking justice through white law, about the need for direct action. Finally, Red Owl called for silence. He spoke directly to Lila in Cheyenne, and her response was passionate, her voice carrying absolute conviction. "She says she will speak her truth, even if it costs her life," Red Owl told Jack. "Says the spirits of her people demand justice." "And you?" Red Owl was quiet for a long moment. "I say Vance makes war on all our people. If he succeeds, if he starts the war, he plans many more will die." He stood, his decision made. "We help you reach Fort Bridger, but we do it our way." What followed was a council of war unlike any Jack had ever attended. Red Owl's warriors were skilled tacticians who knew the country better than any cavalry manual. They knew which passes Vance would watch, which water sources he'd guard, which trails could be traveled safely. The plan was audacious in its simplicity. While Jack and Lila made their way toward Fort Bridger through the expected route, Red Owl's warriors would create diversions, false trails, phantom attacks, sightings of war parties where none existed. The goal was to spread Vance's forces thin, while the real quarry slipped through his net. "It's dangerous," Jack warned. "If Vance catches any of your people." My people have been in danger since the first white man crossed the Missouri," Red Owl replied. "At least now we choose our battles." As the sun set, Jack found himself alone with Lila beside one of the streams that fed the hidden valley. She was washing her hands in cold water, and for a moment she looked younger, more like the girl she should have been. "Are you afraid?" she asked. Jack considered the question honestly. "Terrified. But not of dying. I've been ready for that for years." "Then what?" "Of failing. Of Vance winning. Of your people's deaths meaning nothing." He picked up a smooth stone from the stream bed. "I spent 3 years hiding from the world. But listening to your story, I remember why I used to fight." As full darkness settled over the canyon, Red Owl's warriors began their preparations. They would leave before dawn, splitting into small groups to begin their campaign of misdirection. But as Jack checked his weapons and prepared for what might be his last peaceful night, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial about Vance's plan. He was right to be worried. At that moment, 50 miles away in Ghost Creek, Colonel Vance was meeting with men whose influence reached far beyond Wyoming territory. And the plan they were discussing would turn the entire region into a battleground. The attack came at dawn, shattering the peace of the hidden valley with disciplined rifle fire that echoed off stone walls like thunder. Jack woke to the sound of bullets whining off rocks and Red Owl's warriors shouting commands in their native language. "They found us," Lila said, already on her feet despite her injured ankle. Jack grabbed his rifle and ammunition, his mind racing. The heart of stone was supposed to be impregnable, known only to Red Owl's people. But the gunfire had the steady rhythm of trained soldiers advancing in formation. "How?" he demanded. Red Owl appeared beside them, his face grim with understanding. "Betrayal. Someone told Vance where to find us." The implications hit Jack like a physical blow. If Vance knew about the heart of stone, every part of their plan was compromised. "How many?" Jack asked. 40, maybe 50. Too many to fight here." Red Owl barked orders to his warriors. "We must scatter, use the back trails." But even as he spoke more, gunfire erupted from the rear of the valley. Vance hadn't just found their location, he'd surrounded it completely. Swift Eagle ran up to them, his words rapid and urgent. Red Owl's expression darkened as he listened. "South passage blocked," he translated. "They have men at every exit." Jack felt the familiar chill that preceded a desperate fight. He'd been trapped before, but never with innocent lives, depending on his decisions. "There's another way," he said suddenly. "Old mining tunnel on the eastern ridge. Connects to a shaft that comes out 3 miles from here." Red Owl looked skeptical. "You did not mention this before." "Because it's a death trap. Unstable, probably full of bad air. But if we're quiet, if we're careful." A bullet spanged off the rocks near their heads, ending the discussion. Red Owl shouted orders, and the camp dissolved into controlled chaos as they prepared for a running battle through the canyon system. "Take the girl," Red Owl told Jack. "Get her to safety." "No." Lila's voice was firm, brooking no argument. "I won't run while brave men die for my story. If we escape, we all escape together." Red Owl studied her for a moment, then nodded with approval. "Then we go." Now before they tightened the noose. The next hour was a nightmare of crawling through narrow passages, climbing over loose rock, and staying ahead of pursuing soldiers. The old mining tunnel was everything Jack had warned: a pitch-black shaft carved through unstable rock supported by rotting timbers that creaked ominously with every step. They moved in single file, Jack leading with a torch, followed by Lila and 8 surviving warriors. Behind them they could hear shouts and gunfire as Vance's men discovered the tunnel entrance and began their own pursuit. "How much farther?" Lila whispered, her voice tight with pain from her injured ankle. "Half a mile, maybe less," Jack replied. "But the worst part's coming up a vertical shaft that drops about 50 feet. There's an old rope ladder, but I don't know if it'll hold our weight." They reached the shaft just as the sound of pursuit grew closer. Jack peered down into the darkness, his torch revealing the rickety ladder that some long-dead miner had left behind. The wood was gray with age, and several rungs were missing entirely. "I'll go first," he said. "Test the ladder, see if it's safe." "No time." Red Owl said urgently. The sound of boots on stone was getting closer. They're almost here. Jack didn't argue. He swung over the edge and began his descent, testing each rung carefully before trusting it with his full weight. The ladder swayed and creaked, but held. 20 feet down, one of the rungs snapped under his foot, and he dropped several feet before catching himself on the next solid rung. Broken rung at 20 feet, he called up softly. One by one, the others followed. Lila moved with surprising agility despite her injury, her small size and light weight making the dangerous descent easier. Red Owl came last, and Jack heard him grunt with pain as his weight stressed the ancient wood. They were all safely down when the first soldier appeared at the top of the shaft, his torch revealing their escape route. The man called out to his companions, then began his own descent. "Run," Red Owl said simply. They ran through the lower tunnel, stumbling over loose rocks and ducking under low-hanging beams. Behind them, more soldiers were entering the shaft, their shouts echoing off the stone walls. Jack's torch began to flicker and fade, and he realized they were running out of time before they'd be plunged into complete darkness. Then suddenly there was light ahead, not torchlight, but the gray pre-dawn glow of the outside world. The tunnel mouth was partially blocked by fallen rocks, but there was a gap large enough for a person to squeeze through. Jack helped Lila through first, then the warriors, and finally, Red Owl. As he pulled himself through the gap, he could hear the soldiers behind them very close now. They emerged onto a hillside, dotted with sagebrush and juniper trees, the main road to Ghost Creek, visible in the valley below. In the growing daylight, Jack could see dust clouds rising from multiple locations. Vance's forces were spread out across the territory, covering every possible escape route. "We need horses," Red Owl said, "and we need them fast." As if in answer to his words, a group of riders appeared on the road below, not soldiers, but civilians. Jack recognized the dust-covered clothing and pack animals of a traveling merchant caravan. "There," he said, "if we can reach them by passage." "With what?" Lila asked. "We have no money, nothing to trade." Jack smiled grimly and patted the leather pouch at his belt. 3 years' worth of gold dust. Should be enough to convince them to give us a ride. The dash down the hillside was the longest 100 yards of Jack's life. At any moment, he expected to hear gunfire from the tunnel behind them, expected to feel the impact of a bullet between his shoulder blades. But they reached the road safely just as the merchant caravan was passing. The lead wagon was driven by a grizzled old man who looked like he'd seen every mile of road between California and Missouri. He pulled up short when he saw them, his hand moving instinctively toward the rifle across his knees. "Easy there, friend." Jack called out, his hands visible and empty. "We're not looking for trouble. Just passage to the next town." The old man's eyes took in their appearance, the dust, the weapons, the obvious signs of hard travel. "You running from something, mister. Could say that. How much for passage to Ghost Creek?" "Ghost Creek." The old man spat into the dust. "That's a hard day's ride, and the country's crawling with soldiers. Word is there's Indian trouble brewing." Jack reached into his pouch and pulled out a handful of gold dust, letting it sparkle in the morning light. "This much trouble?" The old man's eyes widened and his attitude changed immediately. "Well, now that's different. Name's Ezra Walsh, and I run goods between Denver and the mining camps. For that much gold, I reckon we can squeeze you in." As they climbed into the back of one of the wagons, hiding among the supplies and trade goods, Jack felt a moment of hope. They'd escaped Vance's trap, they had transportation, and they were still alive. Maybe, just maybe, they could still pull this off. But as the wagon began to roll toward Ghost Creek, none of them noticed the lone rider watching from a distant ridge, a man who immediately turned his horse and galloped hard toward the east, carrying news that would change everything. Colonel Vance was about to learn that his quarry had escaped. And when he did, he would unleash a level of violence that would make the massacre of Lila's people look like a minor skirmish. Ghost Creek squatted in the desert like a wounded animal, its streets crawling with armed men and barricades sprouting at every intersection. As Ezra Walsh's wagon train rolled down Main Street, Jack could see families loading possessions into wagons, preparing for hasty evacuations. "Oh, Jesus," Walsh muttered from the driver's seat. "Looks like the whole territory's gone to war." Jack peered through the canvas tarp that concealed him, Lila, and Red Owl in the back of the supply wagon. The town's preparations were too organized, too coordinated for spontaneous panic. This was orchestrated fear. "Vance is setting the stage," he said quietly. "Getting everyone ready for the war he's planning to start." The wagon train pulled up in front of Creed's Palace, a two-story building that served as both hotel and saloon. Through the gap in the canvas, Jack could see Amos Creed himself standing on the front porch, directing armed men like a general positioning troops. "This is as far as I go," Walsh announced. "Got business with Creed, then I'm heading back to Denver. This country's getting too dangerous for honest trade." As they prepared to slip away from the wagon, Jack noticed something that made his blood run cold. Walsh was walking directly toward Creed, and the two men embraced like old friends, not the casual greeting of merchant and customer, but the warm embrace of conspirators. "Son of a bitch." Jack breathed understanding, flooding through him. Walsh isn't just a merchant. He's been reporting to them all along. The betrayal hit him like a physical blow. Walsh had seemed genuinely helpful, genuinely concerned about their welfare. But he'd been playing a role feeding information to Vance's network while pretending to assist their escape. "The tunnel," Lila whispered urgently. "Walsh must have told them about the old mining works. That's how they knew where to find us." Red Owl's expression was grim. "And now he knows we're here." They slipped away from the wagon train and made their way through Ghost Creek's maze of back alleys, staying in shadows and avoiding the main streets. But Jack could feel the net closing around them with every step. The town was preparing for more than just defense. It was preparing for a massacre. Armed men wearing identical ammunition belts, carrying the same model rifles. This wasn't a citizen militia. It was a private army. "There." Red Owl pointed toward a two-story building at the end of the street. "Hotel. Many men going in, few coming out." Jack recognized the Grand Plains Hotel, the most expensive lodging in Ghost Creek. If Vance was coordinating operations from anywhere, it would be there. But before they could move closer, a commotion erupted on Main Street. Shouting, running feet, and then a voice that made Jack's skin crawl. "Spread out, search every building." Colonel Vance stood in the middle of Main Street, surrounded by 20 soldiers. "They're here somewhere. I want them found." Through a gap between buildings, Jack could see Vance clearly for the first time. Tall, gray-haired, with a perfectly groomed mustache and cold, calculating eyes. He looked like any other career military officer, but Jack had learned to read the signs of corruption in a man's bearing. "Sir." A sergeant ran up, snapping to attention. "We've searched the wagon train. No sign of them." "Then they're hiding in town. Door-to-door search. Anyone who refuses to cooperate gets arrested as a suspected collaborator." As soldiers began spreading through the streets, Jack noticed something else. Several men in civilian clothes were working through the crowd that had gathered to watch spreading rumors and inflaming tensions with practice skill. "Attacked the Patterson stage station this morning. Killed everyone, even the children. War party heading this way." The crowd's reaction was immediate and ugly. Shouts of fear and anger, demands for action against any Indians in the territory. Jack could see how skillfully they were being manipulated, their natural concern for their families being twisted into something darker. "We need to hear what Vance is planning," Jack said. "Get closer to that hotel." "Too dangerous," Lila protested. "He has soldiers everywhere, and he'll keep having soldiers everywhere until we stop him." Jack studied the hotel's exterior, noting windows and potential entry points. This might be our only chance to learn what we're really dealing with. Red Owl was already moving toward a wooden trellis that climbed the hotel's side wall. I go, I listen. Before Jack could object, the Cheyenne warrior was scaling the trellis with fluid grace. Within seconds, he'd reached the level of the second-floor windows and pressed himself against the wall beside an open window. Jack and Lila waited in the alley below, tension coiling in their stomachs as they watched for discovery. On Main Street, Vance's soldiers were conducting their search with increasing aggression, kicking in doors and dragging men from their homes. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, Red Owl began his descent. He dropped the last few feet, landing silently beside them in the alley. "What did you hear?" Jack asked urgently. Red Owl's face was darker than Jack had ever seen it. "Vance meets with railroad men, government officials, mining syndicate. They plan more than war, they plan to reshape entire territory." "How?" "They have man ready to pose as survivor from your camp, Jack. Will claim he witnessed Lila leading war parties against white settlements. Will say she confessed to planning coordinated attacks across 3 territories." Jack felt the pieces clicking together in his mind, forming a picture even worse than he'd imagined. "They don't need us alive for testimony. They need us dead so their fake witness can't be contradicted. There is more." Red Owl continued grimly. "I heard name Major Brennan from Fort Laramie. He comes tomorrow with orders to investigate Vance's operation." "That's good news, isn't it?" Lila asked hopefully. Red Owl's expression was troubled. Vance was not worried. He laughed, said Brennan would find exactly what he expects to find: evidence of massive Indian conspiracy with you as the ringleader. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Vance wasn't just covering up a massacre, he was orchestrating a territorial war that would displace thousands of Native Americans and generate enormous profits for his backers. Before anyone could respond, new shouts arose from Main Street. This time, it wasn't soldiers. It was townspeople gathering around a man on horseback, a rider covered in dust and obviously exhausted from hard travel. Jack crept to the mouth of the alley and listened to the rider's breathless report. "You'd attacked the Copper Creek settlement. Painted warriors, maybe 30 of them, heading toward Devil's Canyon." The crowd's reaction was explosive, but Jack noticed the same pattern as before: certain men working systematically to guide the mob's fury, turning fear into rage. Then Vance appeared at the edge of the crowd, and Jack understood the final piece of his plan: citizens of Ghost Creek. Vance began his voice, carrying military authority. "I've just received confirmation that Cheyenne war parties are conducting coordinated attacks throughout the territory." The crowd roared with outrage, but Vance wasn't finished. "Furthermore, we have evidence that these attacks are being coordinated by the same renegades we've been hunting, including the Cheyenne woman who escaped our justice 3 days ago." Jack felt Lila tense beside him as Vance continued his performance. "Even now, this dangerous savage is being harbored by white renegades who've chosen to side with our enemies against their own people. But I promise you, we will find them. We will stop them. And we will make them pay for every drop of innocent blood they've shed." The crowd was reaching fever pitch, and Jack could see that Vance was preparing to unleash them. Once this mob was turned loose, there would be no controlling the violence that followed. "He's going to turn them into a lynch mob," Lila whispered. "Send them after anyone who looks different, anyone who's shown sympathy." "We have to stop this," Jack said. "How we're 3 people against an entire town." Jack looked at the mob, at Vance manipulating them with practiced ease at the soldiers positioned to guide their fury. It should have been hopeless. But as he watched, Jack noticed something else: doubt in some faces, uncertainty in others. Not everyone was buying Vance's story completely. "But there," he said, pointing to a group of men standing apart from the main crowd. "Miners by the look of them. They're not caught up in the hysteria yet. Because they know the difference between real Indian attacks and manufactured ones," Red Owl observed. "They have worked alongside my people, traded with them." An idea began forming in Jack's mind, desperate, dangerous, but possibly their only chance. "Can you create a distraction?" he asked Red Owl. Something to draw attention away from the hotel. What kind of distraction? Jack's smile was grim. The kind that gives me a chance to get inside and steal the evidence we need. The real evidence documents correspondence proof of the conspiracy that even Brennan can't ignore. That's suicide, Lila protested. Vance has guard soldiers, and he also has his attention focused on the crowd, Jack replied. Sometimes the best place to hide is in plain sight. But before they could act on the plan, a new complication arose. Ezra Walsh appeared at the mouth of their alley, flanked by 2 armed men, and his face carried the apologetic expression of a man about to betray someone who trusted him. "I'm sorry, folks." Walsh said, his voice heavy with what might have been genuine regret. "But Colonel Vance has my daughter and her children in Denver. He's made it clear what happens to them if I don't deliver you." The 2 gunmen raised their weapons, and Jack realized their situation had just become infinitely more complicated. They were trapped in the alley, outnumbered, and about to be handed over to a man who needed them dead to complete his conspiracy. "Ezra," Jack said quietly, his hand moving slowly toward his Colt. "You don't have to do this. There are other ways to protect your family." "Are there?" Walsh's voice cracked with emotion. "Vance showed me photographs, Jack. My little granddaughter playing in her yard in Denver. Said it would be a shame if something happened to such a sweet child. So you betray us instead." Lila's voice was full of pain and anger. "Help him murder more innocent people. I don't have a choice." Walsh's composure finally broke. "You think I wanted this. You think I wanted to help that butcher, but he's got reach, Jack. Men in Denver, Colorado Springs, even Kansas City. There's nowhere my family can hide from him." Jack could see the genuine anguish in the old merchant's eyes, could understand the impossible position Vance had put him in. But understanding didn't change their situation. They were still trapped, still outnumbered, still about to be delivered to their deaths. "There's always a choice, Ezra," Jack said. "The question is whether you can live with the one you're making." For a moment, Walsh wavered, his face contorting with internal struggle. But then one of his gunmen shifted impatiently, and the moment passed. "I'm sorry," Walsh said again, "but my family comes first." That's when Red Owl made his move. The Cheyenne warrior had been standing perfectly still, apparently resigned to capture. But as the gunmen relaxed slightly, thinking their prey was subdued, Red Owl exploded into motion. His knife appeared in his hand, as if by magic, and before either gunman could react, one was down with the blade buried in his chest. The second gunman swung his rifle toward Red Owl, but Jack's Colt was already in his hand. The .45 roared in the confined space of the alley, and the gunman pitched backward into the street. Walsh stood frozen, staring at the bodies of his hired men with horror and what might have been relief. "Ezra," Jack said, his gun still trained on the merchant. "You've got about 10 seconds to decide which side you're really on." From Main Street came the sound of running feet soldiers responding to the gunshots, heading toward their alley. In moments, they would be surrounded again, but this time there would be no escape route. "The hotel," Lila said urgently. "If we're going to get that evidence, it has to be now." Jack looked at Walsh, saw the war between fear and conscience playing out across the old man's weathered features. "Your family doesn't have to die, Ezra. But neither do we. Help us end this, and maybe everyone gets to go home." Walsh was quiet for a long moment, staring at the dead gunman. When he looked up, his eyes held a different kind of resolve. "What do you need me to do?" The plan that formed in the next 30 seconds was born of desperation and fueled by the kind of reckless courage that separates the living from the dead. While Red Owl created a diversion at the town's north end, something involving war cries and rifle fire that would send Vance's soldiers running, Jack and Lila would infiltrate the hotel. Walsh would provide cover by claiming he'd killed the 2 gunmen himself while they tried to steal from his wagon. "The documents are in Vance's room," Lila said as they prepared to move. "Second floor front corner. But he keeps guards posted." Not during a crisis, Jack replied. When the shooting starts, every soldier in town will head toward the sound. That's our window. Red Owl was already melting into the shadows, heading toward his diversionary position. "Give me 5 minutes," he said. "Then watch for my signal." "The what signal?" Walsh asked. The war chief's smile was fierce. "You will know it." As Red Owl disappeared, Jack turned to Walsh. "You sure about this, Ezra? Once you're committed, there's no going back." "My granddaughter's name is Emily," Walsh said quietly. "She's 7 years old and she likes to draw pictures of horses. If helping you means she gets to keep drawing those pictures, then I'm committed." The sound of gunfire erupted from the north end of town, followed by war whoops that echoed off the surrounding buildings. The effect on Main Street was immediate panic, mixed with fury as people scattered for cover while demanding military action. "Now," Jack said. They moved through the chaos toward the Grand Plains Hotel, using the confusion to their advantage. Vance was shouting orders to his soldiers, sending them toward the source of the distraction. The hotel's front entrance was momentarily unguarded. Jack and Lila made it inside and up the back stairs without being seen. The hallway on the second floor was deserted. Everyone had gone to the windows to see what was happening outside. Vance's room was at the end of the hall, its door standing slightly ajar. Through the gap, Jack could see lamplight and hear the rustle of papers. The colonel was inside, probably coordinating the response to Red Owl's diversion. Jack drew his Colt and approached the door, Lila close behind him. He counted to 3, then kicked the door open. Vance spun around his hand, dropping toward his service revolver, but Jack's weapon was already trained on his chest. "Don't," Jack said quietly. "Don't give me a reason." The colonel's eyes took in the 2 intruders, calculating odds and possibilities. He was a professional soldier, trained to assess tactical situations quickly. What he saw apparently convinced him that discretion was the better part of valor. "Mr. Callahan, Miss Whitefeather." Vance's voice was conversational, as if discussing the weather. "You've caused me considerable inconvenience. Nothing compared to what you've caused us." Lila replied, moving to collect the papers scattered across a table near the window. "You know this is pointless," Vance said calmly. "Even if you manage to escape, which seems unlikely, those documents won't convince anyone who matters. The people with real power are already bought and paid for." Jack kept his gun steady. "Maybe, but maybe not. People have a way of surprising you when they learn the truth." "The truth?" Vance laughed, a sound like winter wind through bare branches. "The truth is that this territory is going to be developed whether the savages like it or not. The truth is that progress requires sacrifice, and the weak always sacrifice for the strong." "What about the truth of 43 innocent people murdered for your profit?" Lila's voice was tight with controlled fury. "Acceptable casualties," Vance replied without hesitation. "Regrettable, perhaps, but necessary for the greater good. Your people were standing in the way of something larger than themselves, something more important than their primitive way of life." Jack saw Lila's finger tighten on the trigger of her pistol, saw killing rage flare in her dark eyes. For a moment he thought she might shoot Vance where he stood, and he wasn't entirely sure he'd try to stop her. But then she steadied herself, and her hand relaxed slightly. "No," she said quietly. "He needs to face justice, not revenge." It was at that moment that Jack realized they were no longer alone. Through the open door, he could see armed men moving in the hallway, soldiers who discovered their entry and tracked them to Vance's room. But these weren't Vance's men. They wore different uniforms, carried themselves with the bearing of troops who answered to different orders. At their head walked a tall officer with major's insignia and intelligent eyes that took in the situation immediately. Colonel Vance. The major said, his voice carrying absolute authority. "Stand down. You're under arrest." Vance's face went white, then flushed with anger. "Major Brennan, you're early. I'm exactly on time," Brennan replied, stepping into the room with his soldiers behind him. "The question is why you're pointing a gun at civilians." "These are dangerous fugitives," Vance said, trying to regain control of the situation. "Indian conspirators who've been trying to expose your illegal activities." Brennan interrupted. He looked at Jack and Lila, noting their weapons, but apparently not feeling threatened. "Mr. Callahan, Miss Whitefeather, I presume I've been looking forward to meeting you." Jack felt a flicker of hope, but kept his gun trained on Vance. "Major, I hope you're prepared to hear some ugly truths about your fellow officer." "I've been hearing those truths for weeks," Brennan replied. "Ever since a certain Cheyenne war chief managed to get word to Fort Laramie about what really happened at Whitefeather's camp." Vance's expression was shifting from anger to something approaching panic. "Major, you're being deceived by hostile propaganda. These Indians have been conducting raids." "Have they?" Brennan's voice was skeptical. "Because the evidence I've gathered suggests the only raid was the one you conducted against peaceful Indians. The evidence I've gathered suggests you've been manufacturing a war for profit." As if to punctuate his words, one of Brennan's soldiers stepped forward with a leather satchel. "Found these in the colonel's personal effects, sir. Financial records correspondence with railroad interests maps showing planned development on tribal lands." Brennan opened the satchel and began examining the contents. His face grew darker with each document he reviewed. Payments from the Denver and Pacific Railroad totaling $50,000. He read aloud. "Correspondence discussing the removal of Indian obstacles to development. Maps showing planned rail routes through treaty-protected territory." He looked up at Vance with disgust. "Did you really think you could keep this hidden forever?" But Vance wasn't finished. Even as his world collapsed around him, the colonel was making one last desperate play. Jack saw his hand inch toward something on the desk, not his service revolver, but a small derringer hidden beneath some papers. "Major," Jack shouted, but Vance was already moving. The derringer cracked its small-caliber bullet, taking Brennan in the shoulder and spinning him around. But the major was tough. Instead of going down, he drew his own weapon and returned fire. Chaos erupted in the room. Vance's shot had been meant for Lila, but Jack threw himself between them, taking the bullet in his side. He felt the impact like a hammer blow, but managed to stay on his feet long enough to put 2 round center mass into Vance's chest. The colonel staggered backward, his eyes wide with shock and what might have been disbelief. He tried to raise the derringer for another shot, but his strength was fading fast. Progress. He gasped, blood frothing on his lips. "You can't stop progress." "Watch us," Lila said quietly. Colonel Elias Vance died with his eyes fixed on the documents that would expose his conspiracy, the evidence that would bring down the entire network of corruption he'd helped build. As Jack slumped against the wall, pressing his hand to the wound in his side, he heard something that made him smile, despite the pain. From somewhere in the town below came the sound of voices, not the angry shouts of a mob, but the calmer tones of people asking questions, demanding real answers. The truth was finally coming out. And for the first time in days, Jack Callahan allowed himself to believe they might actually win. The aftermath of Vance's death moved with surprising swiftness. Major Brennan, wounded but very much alive, took command of the situation with military efficiency. The documents found in Vance's room were secured. As evidence, the corrupt soldiers under his command were arrested, and the manufactured crisis that had gripped Ghost Creek began to dissolve like smoke in a strong wind. Jack's wound, while painful, was not life-threatening. The bullet had passed through the fleshy part of his side without hitting any vital organs. As the town doctor cleaned and bandaged the injury, Jack found himself thinking about the strange twists of fate that had brought them to this moment. "You'll live," the doctor pronounced, wrapping the last of the bandages around Jack's torso. "But you'll want to take it easy for a few weeks. No heavy lifting, no sudden movements, and definitely no more gunfights. "I'll try to remember that," Jack said dryly. Lila sat beside his bed in the hotel room that had been converted into a makeshift medical station. Her own wounds had been properly treated, and she looked stronger than she had since the night Jack first found her in the canyon. "Now Walsh wants to see you," she said. "He's downstairs waiting with Major Brennan." Jack nodded. Ezra Walsh had more than redeemed himself in the final confrontation, using his merchant's knowledge of the town to help Brennan's soldiers coordinate their arrests of Vance's conspirators. But Jack knew the old man was still struggling with the choices he'd been forced to make. They found Walsh and Brennan in the hotel's main dining room, which had been commandeered as a temporary headquarters. Maps covered the large table, along with stacks of documents and correspondence that painted a damning picture of corruption reaching from Wyoming territory all the way to Washington, D.C. Jack, Lila. Brennan looked up as they entered. His left arm was in a sling, but his eyes were bright with the satisfaction of justice served. "I wanted to thank you both personally. Without your courage, this conspiracy might have succeeded." "What happens now?" Lila asked. "Now we clean house," Brennan replied. "The evidence you helped us gather implicates dozens of officials, military officers, and business leaders. There will be trials, prosecutions, prison sentences, and there will be reforms to ensure this kind of thing can't happen again." Walsh spoke up from his corner of the room. "My family, safe," Brennan assured him. "We had agents watching them from the moment we learned of Vance's threats. Your daughter and grandchildren are under federal protection until all of Vance's associates are rounded up." The old merchant's relief was visible. He'd aged years in the past few days, carrying the weight of his forced complicity in Vance's scheme. But now, with his family safe and the truth exposed, some of that burden seemed to lift from his shoulders. "There's something else." Brennan continued, turning back to Jack and Lila. "The president has asked to meet with you both. He wants to hear your story firsthand, and he's interested in your ideas about how to prevent similar tragedies in the future." Jack felt Lila's hand slip into his warm and strong, despite everything they'd been through. "We'll consider it," he said. "But right now, we just want to find somewhere quiet to heal and start building something good out of all this destruction." 6 months later, Jack stood on a ridge overlooking the valley that had become known as Harmony Gulch. Below him, the framework of a new kind of community was taking shape: houses built by both Cheyenne craftsmen and white carpenters, a school where children of all backgrounds would learn together, a trading post serving as neutral ground for commerce between cultures. The settlement had grown from a handful of survivors to nearly 200 people, drawn by word of a place where different peoples could coexist in peace. It wasn't perfect. There were still tensions, still misunderstandings, still people on both sides who preferred the familiar hatred to the difficult work of building trust. But it was a start. "You're thinking too hard again," Lila said, climbing the ridge to join him. Her recovery had been complete, and she moved with the fluid grace that had first caught Jack's attention in the canyon. But now, there was something else: the slight swell of her belly beneath her dress, the glow that came with carrying new life. "I'm not thinking," Jack protested. "Planning. The trading post foundation is finished. Red Owl thinks we can have the roof on before first snow." Lila settled beside him on the rocky outcrop, her hand finding his. "Are you sure about the name Sarah Whitefeather Callahan?" Jack said, his voice soft with emotion. "She'll know about the woman she's named for, about the love that brought her parents together." Jack felt the familiar tightness in his throat when he thought about his first family. But now, instead of just pain, there was continuity, love persisting across time and loss. Hope growing in the soil of tragedy. "Might be a boy," he pointed out. "She's not..." Lila spoke with absolute certainty. "She's going to be strong, brave, and she's going to help change the world." A dust cloud on the horizon caught Jack's attention. Through his spyglass, he could see a familiar wagon train approaching, not the first to stop at Harmony Gulch, and certainly not the last. Over the past months, the settlement had become a way station for travelers crossing the territory. Word had spread about the mixed community, about successful cooperation between Indians and whites, about opportunities for peaceful coexistence and honest trade. "Walsh," Jack told Lila, "with supplies from Denver, and it looks like he's got passengers this time." The irony wasn't lost on him. Ezra Walsh had become one of their most reliable supporters, his guilt over his forced betrayal transforming into fierce determination to make amends. His wagon trains now carried both goods and families, looking to start fresh in a place where the past didn't have to determine the future. But as the wagon train drew closer, Jack noticed something that made him frown. These weren't the usual mix of hopeful settlers and curious traders. These men rode with military precision, their weapons clearly visible, their faces hard with purpose. "Red Owl," Jack called to the war chief, who was supervising construction of the trading post below. "We've got company." Red Owl shaded his eyes against the sun, studying the approaching riders. "Not Walsh," he said after a moment. "These men come for war, not trade." Jack felt the familiar chill that preceded trouble. Through his spyglass, he could see the leader of the group more clearly now, a tall man with colonel's insignia and the bearing of someone accustomed to getting his way through force. "Colonel Marcus Webb," Jack said, recognizing the face from sketches circulated by federal marshals. "One of Vance's old associates. I thought Brennan had rounded up all of them." "Apparently not all," Red Owl replied grimly. As the riders drew closer, Jack could see they numbered at least 20 men too many to be a casual patrol, not enough to be a full military expedition. This was something else entirely, a settling of accounts perhaps, or a last desperate attempt to salvage something from Vance's ruined conspiracy. "Get everyone to safety," Jack told Red Owl. "Women and children to the caves, fighting men to the barricades." "What about Walsh's wagon train?" Lila asked. "They'll be caught in the middle." Jack studied the positioning of the various groups through his spyglass. Walsh's wagons were still a mile out, moving slowly along the main trail. Webb's riders were approaching from the east, moving fast and directly toward Harmony Gulch. They would reach the settlement several minutes before the merchant caravan. "Signal Walsh to stop where he is," Jack decided. "We deal with Webb first." As the residents of Harmony Gulch prepared for what might be their first real test as a community, Jack felt a familiar mix of fear and determination. They'd built something precious here, something that proved people could choose cooperation over conflict. But now that choice was going to be tested by men who preferred the old ways of hatred and violence. Colonel Webb's riders crested the final hill overlooking Harmony Gulch and reined in their horses, studying the settlement spread out below them. Even from a distance, Jack could see the contempt on their faces, the disgust of men who viewed any cooperation between races as betrayal of the natural order. Then Webb raised his arm, and his men began their descent toward the valley floor. The battle for the future of Harmony Gulch was about to begin. Webb's men deployed with military precision, taking positions that surrounded the settlement on 3 sides, while leaving the western approach open, a classic tactic designed to funnel defenders into a killing ground if they tried to flee. But Jack had no intention of running. This was home now, and some things were worth fighting for. 22 men. Red Owl reported having counted the riders as they took their positions. All armed, all experienced. But they do not know the ground like we do. The settlement's defenders numbered only 16 fighting men, a mix of Cheyenne warriors, former soldiers, and civilians who'd learned to handle weapons during their journey west. Not good odds, but Jack had faced worse. "What do you think they want?" asked Samuel Morrison, a former cavalry sergeant who deserted after witnessing one too many massacres. "Revenge money. Or are they just here to finish what Vance started?" Jack studied Webb through his spyglass. The colonel was a professional soldier, not the kind of man who would risk his career and his life on a simple revenge mission. There had to be something else, some prize valuable enough to justify this kind of risk. His question was answered when Webb rode forward under a white flag, stopping just within shouting distance of the settlement's main barricade. "Jack Callahan." Webb's voice carried clearly in the desert air. "I know you're in there. I've got a proposition for you." Jack emerged from behind the barricade, his rifle held casually but ready. "I'm listening, Webb." "Smart man. Here's the situation. You've got something I need, and I've got something you want to keep." Webb gestured toward his men who had their weapons trained on the settlement. "Those documents you and the girl stole from Colonel Vance, I want them back. They're already in federal hands." Jack called back. "Major Brennan took them to Fort Laramie." Webb's laugh was harsh and without humor. "Brennan took copies, Callahan, but the originals are still here, hidden somewhere. You thought they'd be safe. And those originals contain information that could hang half the territorial government." Jack felt ice form in his stomach. Webb was right. They had kept the original documents, hiding them in case the copies were lost or destroyed. But how could Webb know that? "Even if I had them." Jack replied, "Why would I give them to you?" "Because if you don't, I'm going to turn this place into another Sand Creek." Webb's voice carried the absolute conviction of a man prepared to commit any atrocity. "Every man, woman, and child. And when I'm done, I'll make sure the world knows that Harmony Gulch was a nest of Indian conspirators who died resisting lawful authority." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Jack looked back at the settlement behind him, at the houses where families were sheltering, at the school where children had been learning to read in 2 languages, at the trading post, where former enemies had learned to work together. "You've got 1 hour to decide," Webb continued. "After that, we come in shooting." As Webb rode back to his lines, Jack felt the weight of impossible choices settling on his shoulders. Give Webb the documents, and dozens of corrupt officials would escape justice. Refuse, and everyone in Harmony Gulch would die. There has to be another way, Lila said, joining him at the barricade. Despite her pregnancy, she'd insisted on staying with the fighters rather than retreating to the caves with the other non-combatants. "Maybe there is," Jack said slowly, an idea beginning to form in his mind. "But it's going to require perfect timing and a lot of luck." He gathered the community's leaders around him, Red Owl, Morrison, Lila, and a handful of others who'd proven themselves during the settlement's short but eventful history. "The Webb thinks we're trapped," Jack began. "And in conventional terms, we are. But he's made one crucial mistake. He's assuming we'll fight like a conventional force." "What do you mean?" Morrison asked. "He's positioned his men to contain us, not to assault us. That means he's vulnerable to the kind of guerrilla tactics Red Owl's people have been using for generations." Jack looked at the war chief. "How many of your warriors can slip out through the back trails without being seen?" Red Owl considered the question. 6, maybe 8. "But what good will that do against 20 armed men?" "Depends on what those 8 men do with their freedom," Jack replied. "Webb's expecting a siege. What he's not expecting is to become the besieged." The plan that emerged from their hurried council was audacious in its simplicity. While Red Owl's warriors slipped out through hidden trails to take positions behind Webb's lines, the main body of defenders would stage a fighting withdrawal, drawing Webb's men into the settlement where superior numbers would matter less than knowledge of the terrain. But the key to the whole plan was timing. They needed Webb to commit his forces to an assault before Red Owl's warriors were in position. And that meant someone had to stay behind to coordinate the defense while everyone else was pulling back. "I'll do it," Jack said when the question arose. "It has to be someone Webb will negotiate with, someone who can buy time." "No," Lila said firmly. "If you're staying, I'm staying. We're in this together." Jack started to argue, then saw the look in her eyes and realized it would be pointless. Lila Whitefeather had survived the massacre of her entire band, had evaded cavalry patrols across hundreds of miles of hostile territory, had faced down Colonel Vance in his own headquarters. She wasn't going to be deterred by concern for her personal safety. "Together, then," he said finally, as the sun climbed toward its zenith, painting the desert in shades of gold and fire. The residents of Harmony Gulch prepared for the fight of their lives. Children and elderly were evacuated through back trails, supplies were distributed to defensive positions, and weapons were checked one final time. But even as they prepared for war, Jack couldn't help thinking about the irony of their situation. They'd built Harmony Gulch as a refuge from violence, a place where people could choose cooperation over conflict. Now they were about to defend that vision with the very violence they'd hoped to leave behind. The sound of hoofbeats interrupted his thoughts. A single rider was approaching under a white flag, not Webb this time, but a younger officer with lieutenant's bars and nervous eyes. "Mr. Callahan," the lieutenant called out. "Colonel Webb wants to know your decision." Jack looked back at Lila, saw his own thoughts reflected in her dark eyes. They'd come too far, sacrificed too much to surrender now. "Tell your colonel he can go to hell," Jack called back. The lieutenant wheeled his horse and galloped back to Webb's lines. Within minutes, Jack could see the colonel's men preparing for assault, checking weapons, and mounting their horses for the final attack. The battle for Harmony Gulch was about to begin. And whatever the outcome, Jack Callahan knew that the choice they'd made to stand and fight for the dream of peace was the right one, even if it killed them all. Webb's assault came like a thunderclap. 22 horsemen charging down the hillside with rifles blazing and war cries that echoed off the surrounding cliffs. But instead of the panicked retreat Webb expected, he found the settlement's defenders executing a disciplined fighting withdrawal, using every building and barricade to maximum advantage. Jack and Morrison had positioned themselves in the trading post, its thick log walls providing excellent cover, while offering clear fields of fire across the settlement's main square. From there, they could coordinate the defense while picking off Webb's men as they advanced. "There." Morrison pointed toward a group of riders trying to flank their position. 3 men moving along the creek bed. Jack's rifle cracked twice in rapid succession, and 2 of the riders went down. The third wheeled his horse and retreated, but not before Morrison's shot took him in the shoulder and sent him tumbling from his saddle. The plan was working, but barely. Webb's men were experienced fighters, and they were adapting quickly to the defenders' tactics. Already Jack could see them beginning to coordinate their attacks, using covering fire to advance from building to building. "They're learning fast," Morrison observed, reloading his rifle with practiced efficiency. "Won't be long before they figure out how to flank us properly." From their position in the trading post, Jack could see the battle developing across the settlement. Red Owl's remaining warriors were fighting a series of delaying actions, using their superior knowledge of the terrain to slow Webb's advance. But they were being pushed back steadily, and it was only a matter of time before the defensive perimeter collapsed entirely. "But where the hell is Red Owl?" Jack muttered, scanning the hills surrounding the settlement. The war chief and his strike force should have been in position by now, ready to hit Webb's men from behind. But there was no sign of them, no indication that the second part of their plan was working. The crack of nearby gunfire drew his attention back to the immediate battle. Webb himself was leading a group of dismounted soldiers in a direct assault on the trading post, using the blacksmith shop and general store for cover as they advanced. Jack Callahan. Webb's voice carried clearly over the sound of gunfire. "This is your last chance. Give me those documents and I'll let the women and children live." "Go to hell, Webb," Jack called back, punctuating his refusal with a rifle shot that sent the colonel diving for cover. But even as he maintained his defiant front, Jack was beginning to worry. Their ammunition was running low, their defensive positions were being overrun one by one, and there was still no sign of Red Owl's flanking attack. Maybe the war chief had been discovered and captured. Maybe he decided the risk was too great. Or maybe he was simply too late to make a difference. The sound of splintering wood announced that Webb's men had broken through the trading post's back door. Morrison spun to meet this new threat, his pistol speaking rapidly as soldiers poured through the opening. But there were too many of them, and Morrison went down with bullets in his chest and shoulder. Jack found himself trapped between two groups of enemies, his rifle empty and no time to reload. He drew his Colt and started shooting, knowing that each bullet might be his last. One soldier went down, then another, but more kept coming. That's when the war cries erupted from the hills surrounding the settlement. Not the manufactured battle cries of white soldiers, but the genuine war songs of Cheyenne warriors attacking their enemies. Red Owl's flanking force had finally arrived, and they hit Webb's rear guard like a thunderbolt. The effect on Webb's assault was immediate and dramatic. Caught between the settlement's defenders and Red Owl's warriors, his men found themselves fighting on two fronts with no clear line of retreat. The disciplined attack dissolved into chaos as soldiers broke ranks and tried to reach their horses. But Webb himself wasn't finished. Even as his grand plan collapsed around him, the colonel was making one last desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. Jack saw him break away from the main battle, leading 3 of his men directly toward the trading post where Jack was trapped. "The documents, Callahan," Webb shouted as he kicked in the front door. "Tell me where they are, or I'll put a bullet in that pregnant squaw of yours." Jack felt his blood turn to ice as he saw that Webb's threat wasn't idle. One of the colonel's men had Lila at gunpoint, having captured her during the confusion of the battle. Her hands were bound, and there was blood on her forehead from where someone had struck her, but her eyes still blazed with defiant courage. "The documents are in the school," Jack said quickly, his mind racing as he tried to find some way out of this trap. "Hidden in a false bottom of the teacher's desk." Webb smiled coldly. "I thought they might be. You always were too sentimental, Callahan, hiding evidence in a symbol of your precious cooperation." He gestured to one of his men. "Check it out, Sergeant." As the sergeant left to search the school, Webb kept his rifle trained on Jack, while his remaining soldier held Lila hostage. The sounds of battle were dying down outside, but Jack couldn't tell who was winning. All he knew was that he had perhaps minutes to save Lila and their unborn child. "You know this won't work," Jack said, trying to keep Webb talking while he looked for some opportunity, some chance to turn the tables. "Even if you get the documents, even if you kill us all, the truth is already out there. Brennan's copies are enough to hang your entire network." "Maybe," Webb agreed. "But without the originals, there's room for doubt. Room for lawyers to argue that the copies were forged, that the whole thing was an elaborate hoax designed to discredit honest officials." His smile was purely predatory. "Besides, I've got nothing left to lose. My career is finished, my fortune is gone, my associates are all dead or arrested. At least this way I take some of my enemies with me." The sergeant returned from the school carrying a leather portfolio that Jack recognized. "Found them, Colonel?" "Right where he said they'd be." Webb's smile widened. "Excellent. Now we can finish this properly." He raised his rifle, aiming directly at Jack's chest. "Any last words, Callahan?" But before Webb could pull the trigger, a new voice cut through the tension. "I've got some words for you, Colonel." Everyone turned to see Major Brennan standing in the trading post's doorway, his own rifle trained on Webb's back. Behind him were a dozen federal soldiers, their weapons ready and their faces grim with purpose. "How?" Webb began, but Brennan cut him off. "How did I get here so fast, Simple? We've been tracking you for weeks, Webb, ever since you broke out of the stockade at Fort Collins." Brennan stepped into the room, his men following. "Did you really think we'd let Vance's old associates roam free?" Webb's face went through a rapid series of emotions, surprise, anger, calculation, and finally, a kind of desperate resignation. "You're too late, Brennan. I've got the documents and I've got hostages. No, Brennan said quietly. You've got nothing. That's when Red Owl appeared behind the soldier, holding Lila, his knife sliding between the man's ribs with surgical precision. The soldier dropped without a sound, and Lila was free. Webb spun toward this new threat, but Jack was already moving. His Colt appeared in his hand, as if by magic, and he put 2 bullets center mass into the colonel's chest before the man could adjust his aim. Webb staggered backward, his rifle clattering to the floor. He looked down at the spreading red stain on his uniform with something like surprise. Progress. He gasped, echoing his dead mentor's final words. You can't stop progress. Watch us, Lila said quietly, the same words she'd spoken to Vance. Colonel Marcus Webb died with his eyes fixed on the documents that had cost him everything and the evidence that would ensure his network of corruption was completely destroyed. As the gun smoke cleared and the last echoes of battle faded, Jack found himself holding Lila close, feeling the steady beat of her heart and the gentle movement of their unborn child. Around them, the residents of Harmony Gulch were emerging from their hiding places, beginning the work of assessing damage and treating the wounded. Is it over? Lila asked. Jack looked around at the settlement they'd built, at the people who'd chosen to stand and fight for their vision of peace. There was damage, certainly buildings that would need repair wounds, that would need healing trust, that would need rebuilding. But the dream itself had survived. This part is over, he said finally. But the real work is just beginning. Major Brennan approached them, the recovered documents in his hands. These will finish the job Vance started, he said. Every corrupt official, every dirty deal, every innocent death, it's all here. Justice will be served. And then what? Jack asked. Brennan smiled. Then you get back to building the future, and the rest of us try to learn from your example. As the sun set over Harmony Gulch, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Jack Callahan felt something he hadn't experienced in years, genuine hope for tomorrow. The battle was won and the conspiracy was destroyed, and the dream of peace had proven stronger than the forces of hatred and greed. There would be other challenges, other threats to face. But for now in this place, they'd built together, peace reigned. And that was enough. The story that had begun with screams in Devil's Jaw Canyon was ending with laughter in Harmony Gulch. And for the first time in years, Jack believed that was exactly how it should be. In the distance, a child's voice rose in song, half English, half Cheyenne, all hope. It was the sound of tomorrow being born, and it was beautiful.